Top of the morning, Dan, and in for Amy this morning is former police officer, former state representative, current host of Black and Right, John Anthony. Saturdays, 1 p.m. on these airwaves.
Hey, thanks, Dan.
John, great to have you. And Van Jones is a former and current Obama suck toy who leveraged that into being a CNN contributor. And this is what he had to say about the Chauvin trial and what would happen were Derek Chauvin not to be convicted. And I think when he means not convicted, I think that includes if he's only convicted of lesser included charges.
The system is on trial here. The system is on trial. And I can't tell you, people have tried to push away from this, move on from this. Today brought it all back home for tens of millions of people. And if this is considered legal conduct from a police officer, if you can do this in broad daylight and not go to jail, it will be perceived as open season, telling police officers from coast to coast, you can literally get away with murder in broad daylight.
As if that's a police officer's disposition is to see what they can get away with in terms of abusing the constituents they serve. But that's sort of an important premise that you have to understand Van Jones and so many on the defund the police left are starting from. For more on the topic, we're pleased to be joined by a former police officer, Tucson, if I recall correctly, co-founder of BLEXIT and author of the upcoming book, Beaten Black and Blue, Being a Black Cop in an America Under Siege. Brandon Tatum, thanks for joining us again, Brandon. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, good morning.
What about what Van Jones had to say? Is that right?
Yeah, I think Van Jones is, I don't have a lot of respect for Van Jones. I think he flip-flopped his message depending on what CNN want him to talk about or whatever the left want him to talk about. I think that the system is not on trial to the average everyday person who have common sense. The system is on trial to these leftist lunatics and BLM and all these activists who want a expected outcome. I think that for me, I want to see justice served, and that means that they're going to have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Derek Chauvin had intent to kill George Floyd in whatever ways that match the description of the statute. And if they cannot reach that burden, then Derek Chauvin is innocent in the court of law. And if that's the verdict that they reach, then that's what it is. And if he's charged with murder or whatever lesser included charges, then that is also acceptable. I think that, we'll see at the end of this trial, and people should accept whatever comes from this with the understanding that our criminal justice system isn't inherently racist every time, an outcome goes in a different direction than some may expect.
That's true. Hey, Brandon, I really loved your take on it on the Tatum Report on YouTube and how you were breaking down the differences between the statute and how it read, especially when it came to the unintentional murders, of them having to prove that Chauvin was trying to commit a felony in the midst of trying to do his job, basically. I thought that was. Do you mind going into that and just because I think that's the most important part, because if the defense is able to create doubt, I think you're 1,000% correct. Chauvin walks free.
Correct. I mean, one of the charges, at least the highest charge that they have, is second-degree murder. Some people believe that, they may be misunderstanding second-degree murder is normally intentional murder without premeditation. But in this sense, there's a subsection 2 of that statute says that, it's unintentional, but committing a felony crime or intentionally committing a felony crime in the midst. And I just think that that's going to be a hard burden to prove, given the fact that George Floyd was under intoxicating substances, deadly substances, and also he was combative, he was irrational, and Derek Chauvin was potentially performing a maneuver that's trained and operated by that police department. So it's going to be very difficult to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, speaking of the training, because that's one of the defenses that will be raised in addition to George Floyd being under the influence and what was the proximate cause of his death. The defense is going to challenge that. They're going to challenge based on the training, too, saying that knee to the neck is something that Minneapolis police officers are taught as a way to maintain an unruly suspect. I suppose the problem, it would seem to me as a layman, that Chauvin has and the defense has is, at some point there needs to be a reasonable man standard. And even if that was your training, the idea that you would maintain that posture when it's clear or should have been clear to the reasonable person that George Floyd was in medical distress is a problem.
And I agree 1,000%, and that's probably why he's on trial now. Is because to the naked eye, it looks that it was irrational for him to have him on the ground that long and not render aid and all of the above. But what it's going to come down to is two things, in my personal opinion, is that with the methamphetamine and fentanyl, which it's inevitable, I think, that at this point, with the amount of fentanyl that he ingested, that he was going to die, or he was on his way to death, even if Chauvin never came to the scene. So that's going to be something that's going to play. Was the cause of death actually the fentanyl and methamphetamine? And then the other, I guess, proof that the defense is going to have to raise is how is the maneuver functioned? Not what it looks like,
right,
but how is it actually functioned? And I know on the police department, we have maneuvers similar to that, is that people may observe it and think that we're holding 100% of our body weight
right
on our leveraged knee, and that's not what's happening. We kind of have a balance between the knee and the heel so that you don't put pressure, although you control. So if they can prove, the defense can prove that, hey, he wasn't putting pressure on George Floyd's neck, he was just acting out because he was high on drugs, and Chauvin was having a level of restraint, it just looked bad. And that, if the defense can prove that, I think that would create reasonable doubt, and Chauvin may not be charged with any of these crimes.
Yeah, and Brandon, I think when this first happened, I wanted to go and see what you were going to say, and initially when it first happened, I think a lot of people forget that 8 minutes and 49 seconds is just a portion of it. People forget everything that happened from the beginning because as we're trained as cops, the totality of the circumstance. What's everything that happened at that moment? Going up to the car. First of all, the fake $20 bill, going to the car, trying to swallow the fentanyl and the drugs, putting it in his mouth. Nobody even knew anything about that. I speak more to that because the totality of the circumstance is really what it's all going to come down to, to determine if Chauvin and I think the other three are going to walk. Period. Because I don't see there's any way that you can charge these guys with any crime, in my opinion. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, 100%. I agree. You're not charging anybody else with a crime. I mean, they were doing their job. And people do need to look at the totality of the circumstances, because if you just look at him crying for his life on the ground, it can be very compelling. But the jurors are not going to just watch that 8 minutes or 9 minutes. They're going to see the whole thing,
right,
which you're going to see George Floyd's mental state, him claiming that he was claustrophobic when he was in a patrol car, yet he was in the driver's seat of another car full of people. And so it kind of kills his argument of his reliability. Also, Derek Chauvin was incredibly kind to George Floyd at the very beginning of this call. So it's going to be very hard to see Chauvin participating or acting towards George Floyd with respectful, kind manner, and then all of a sudden he becomes this vicious killer that wants to see George Floyd die and go to hell. So
right,
it's going to be very difficult for the jury to just focus on this one situation when you have a combative George Floyd, when you have an irrational George Floyd, and then I'm guaranteed they're going to bring a person who's going to testify to the reaction that a person will have from drugs
yes,
that are so fatal, like fentanyl and even crazy drugs like methamphetamine.
Brandon Tatum, I wanted to get your opinion on another law and order matter, particularly because you were in Tucson as a police officer. Listen to what Border Patrol agent Oscar Escamilla had to say about what he has encountered with these children coming across the border and then being taken into federal custody.
And I told the congressional delegation the same thing, right? We were going to send her to the hospital. And as I got closer to her, I noticed that she couldn't speak. And I asked the medical staff what happened. And the reason she was going to the hospital because she had gotten gang raped. And the reason that she couldn't speak was because she had lost her voice in the process while she was getting raped. Those things hit hard. These kids cross by themselves. Obviously, the parent pays a fee to the smuggler. The cartel member or the smuggler at this point will bring the kid over. We'll bring him to the river. We'll hand him over to the raft. We'll place him in a raft and say, okay, go. When you get to the other side, they'll explain to them, there's going to be an officer. They'll explain what we wear and tell them, turn yourselves into them. These kids, some of them, will tell you the different stories. They'll tell you that they don't have their parents. There's a little girl that I talked to a little while ago. She said that she had lost her mom and that she doesn't have a father. So she's coming into this country because her uncle is going to be the sponsor. So they want to take this little girl is going into the States. And I asked her, what state are you going to? What's your final destination? She said, I don't know. All I know is that it snows there. That's all I know.
And what's happening at the border in the context of a projection that as many as 1 million migrants are expected to be at the U.S.-Mexico border this year. Brandon, your comment on the border?
Oh yeah, it's horrifying that our politicians can't resolve this issue. And the thing about it is that they're playing politics and they don't really care about the lives of these individuals. You know, what kind of life are you going to have, especially during a pandemic? You're going to come to America. You cannot speak English. It's going to be almost impossible for you to actually get a job and have a way of life. You're coming to a foreign country where you know nobody. Many of these children who are coming over are unaccompanied. I don't know why people aren't getting it at this point. And then to travel over. I mean, people act like, you know, that God somehow picked these kids up and dropped them off right at the border in a safe space. That's not what happens. They have a trick, and they're getting raped. They're getting abused. Women are getting abused when they come over here. I mean, these people are not, you know, fine individuals. And this is a coordinated effort by the cartel in Mexico. And I don't understand how our country is leveraging power to the cartel by accepting these people and telling them to come over here and we'll give you amnesty. We can't even take care of people in L.A. We can't even take care of people in the inner city. How in the world, and I almost want to cuss at the thought of this, how in the world are we expecting to take care of millions of people who can't add value to this country, that don't even know where they're headed, don't even know people in this country? I mean, we're doing them an injustice. I think that what we should do, we should close our border, protect our border, and fix our immigration process. So therefore, people don't have to sneak over here and pay for coyotes. They can come over here legally if that's what our country wants to do, and we can make sure we get them assimilated into our country so they can have opportunities and rights like American citizens do, instead of them flying under the radar, getting raped and abused. And in many cases, law enforcement is something that they're afraid of when they get over here in the States. So when they do get raped on this side, or if they get abused on this side or being mistreated, they're not going to call the police because they're afraid they're going to get deported. That's not the way people should live in this country.
He is Brandon Tatum. He's a former Tucson police officer, co-founder of BLEXIT, and author of the upcoming book, Beaten Black and Blue, Being a Black Cop in an America Under Siege. Brandon, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
God bless you. Thank you.
All right. And he joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
What do you get when you talk to a Dell Technologies advisor? You get someone who understands there's an art to listening.
Sure.
Who's able to hear more than what's being said and can provide tailored small business solutions that make you feel truly heard.
I understand. Let's get started.
For advice on everything from laptops to the cloud and solutions powered by Intel vPro platform, call an advisor today at 877-ASK-DELL.
What happens when health insurance goes further? When we combine access and attention with community and compassion? When data helps 2 million at-risk senior citizens get COVID-19 vaccines? Everything changes. At America's Health Insurance Plans, we're bringing health insurance providers together, delivering care and coverage for better health and lower costs. Why? Because care changes everything. Learn more at carechangeseverything.org.
With cold weather on the way, the race is on to get new windows. Are your windows needy?
Call Crumweedy.
Crumweedy Home Pros. Crumweedy Home